Perfect. All right. So thank you, everybody who is able to find some time to make it. And Charlene, especially, we are very grateful that you're taking some time just to share some of your great resources that you have. And so I think I'm just going to hand it over to you to maximize our time.
Okay, and I'm going to make it, we're a small group, so I'd like to make it as conversational as possible. So please ask questions, share your own experiences if you wish. That is just perfect with me. So I am going to share my screen and then go into, I have a few slides to just move us along. Share screen. And I want to share screen too. I'm usually using Teams, so this is a little different for me. Okay.
You're good. We can see your slides.
Okay, perfect. So I am just, there we go. Everything's working for me too. So I don't need any more introduction. You know what organization I'm with. I would like to recognize that I am in Southern Ontario. We're very fortunate to have a country property. I am very cognizant that this land was cared for by many Indigenous peoples. Southern Ontario had many Indigenous peoples come across this land, and they cared for it and honored it so that now I can enjoy it. So I'm very appreciative of that. So I want to start with a little bit of my story, because you're probably wondering, well, you will wonder when I tell you that my entire career was in marketing communications, mostly for big financial companies. And so how did I land up at the Rick Hansen Foundation? Well, it all started, the journey started with a horrific phone call at 4 o'clock in the morning from an intensive care unit in Sault Ste. Marie. Parents' worst nightmare. Our son, Paul, was in intensive care. He had been run over by an aggressive, angry, drinking young man in a parking lot. He was celebrating with a fellow colleague. Paul, at that point, was an aviation instructor for Sault College. You can relate to this, Jennifer, having a husband at Air Canada. And actually, Paul was to have an interview 2 days later with Air Canada. And so it started a long journey of Paul being in intensive care for 101 days, then 3 months in hospital, then rehab. And during that time, it was quite miraculous because he had so many broken bones, lung ripped off. Well, it was miraculous that he lived first, and then miraculous that he did not have any spinal cord injury. But because his body was so compromised, he contracted a virus called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which affects mobility, all mobility. So he had no mobility, no even move your head mobility for a long time. And slowly some movement came back, but it left him with no movement in his hands or his legs. So it's during rehab, Rick Hansen actually came to visit him. And that was pivotal for Paul and for us. So I'm happy to say that the tragedy turned into triumph. This is a picture of Paul at Blue Jays game with his sister and his niece. He lives independently in the Distillery District in Toronto, for anyone who knows the Toronto area. He has season's tickets to the Jays. He went back to school because obviously he wasn't going to be a pilot anymore, and took sports and event marketing, and now works with the Pinball Clemens Foundation. Pinball, for those football fans out there, you will know pinball, but he was an Argos football player, became a coach, and now is general manager of the Toronto Argos football team. But all of this gave me a passion for accessibility and sharing an understanding of disability. And that's why I ended up with the Rick Hansen Foundation, because there is so much to learn. I had to learn a lot, and my eyes were opened, and I wish I'd known a lot more before a tragedy was the cause of my new learning. So I like to share what I've learned and what the foundation does. We focus on 3 disabilities, really: vision, hearing, and mobility. And I was very fortunate to see one girl here with a basketball. She's from Hamilton. She's one of the youngest members of the national wheelchair basketball team. And I interviewed her, as well as a young man with hearing loss and a young man with vision loss, this past summer. And their perspectives really helped us build out some of the resources that we have now. So I just want to mention a few things about the Rick Hansen Foundation. I'm sure that you will know about Rick Hansen. The young people don't necessarily, and maybe not in Newfoundland, even though, you know, he crossed 34 countries, went 40,000 kilometers when he did the Man in Motion tour. But always from the time of his injury, car accident and spinal cord injury, he has been a champion for awareness and change. He was the first individual with a disability to graduate from UBC's phys ed program. He did the Man in Motion tour. He played basketball with Terry Fox. And after he did his world tour, he came back and said, it's the young people who are going to change all of this for us around the world. So we started the Rick Hansen Foundation and the school program, which I'm part of. The foundation has expanded now. We have an arm that does training for employees, a separate part of the foundation. We also have a part of the foundation that goes in and assesses buildings and gives ratings on buildings and helps organizations become more accessible in their physical space. So I don't know if we want to do these polls with such a small group, but these are just, maybe I'll just go through the questions. You don't have to do the polling. If there was a larger group, it's fun to see what people answer. Whoops, oh, I didn't log in to poll everywhere. So you know what? We're going to, the first question was just examples of disabilities. And so just looking, I'm going to skip through these and just go into a little more about inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. And I really like the A added to, a lot of times you hear about D, E, and I, but the access is so important. A colleague of mine who uses a wheelchair, she always says to me, and this just resonates, you can't be included if you don't have access. So you can't be included in any activity if you don't have access to the space, or even access via attitudes, because attitudes can be a big barrier to those with disabilities. So we have a lot of resources on language and interactions best practices. And it's interesting, we were just talking about this, you know, your Ukrainian student who is having challenges with the language, the concepts, the language, the culture. And for those with disabilities, it can be the same, whether it's words used appropriately or inappropriately, or whether it's just interacting with someone with a disability and not knowing which words to use. One thing that a lot of people ask us about is person first and identity first language. So this doesn't only apply to individuals with disabilities. You might hear somebody say, I'm a school teacher and I have a Black American history. Or you might hear someone say, I'm a Black teacher. So if they identify really strongly with their culture, they may use identity first language, Black person. The same is true for those with disabilities. For our son, he's Paul, happens to use a wheelchair. For others, they want their disability as part of their identity. So I'm a deaf person named Charlene, if I was deaf. So it really depends on the individual. And there's a lot of controversy, even in the disability community, but it's really individual. And that's really what language and interaction is all about, is asking questions and just being sensitive to people have different ideas of how they want to present themselves and how they want to interact. And interactions are, as long as they're authentic and genuine, that's all anyone is looking for. Each one of us just wants to be accepted as an individual with our uniquenesses, and the same is true with disabilities. And you can only ask someone, and sometimes even with our son Paul, I'll make assumptions about how he might feel about something, about an interaction. We were at a Jays game and someone came up and, had caught a baseball and gave it to him. And after the person left, I said, "Oh, that's patronizing." And Paul said, "Mom, chill. He's just trying to connect with me. He looked me in the eye. He talked to me. I don't care." Like, Paul has a lot of baseballs, but it's the intention. If our intentions are genuine and authentic and kind, everyone in the disability community will accept that.
And I think that really relates to almost everything, right? That, well-meaning people like myself, who's able-bodied, right? And then, you say things like they're handy capable, and they're like, dude, don't, like, just ask me who I am. But like you said, it's so diverse for everyone. And so if we could just get to know each other versus putting labels that are our own labels on them.
And the language evolves, right? I mean, I just think of in the gender identity community, how the language has changed. And so it's just being sensitive to that fact and asking the right questions. And then, of course, again, we have lots of resources, and our resource library is categorized by grade and topic, a lot on physical barriers and then attitudinal barriers. And physical barriers, this is a really huge one for anyone using a wheelchair, of course, or any kind of mobility device, or low vision. Light switches were mentioned, but even light can be problematic. And I know with our accessible Airbnb, it's really mobility accessible. I'm not so sure someone with low vision, because we have a glass railing on our deck, which is not really great for someone who's blind. So thinking about all the different disabilities and how someone might react in their environment. And again, asking a ton of questions. So when we travel, and our daughter is our travel agent, she digs into everything from airplanes to hotel rooms to restaurants. And often restaurants especially will say they're accessible if you can get in the door, but they may not have accessible washrooms. Or they may have an accessible washroom downstairs, which doesn't work either. I know we have a school here in Kitchener that has an accessible washroom down a flight of stairs. Somebody, I guess, had to build an accessible washroom in the school, and so they put it downstairs. Doesn't make any sense. The attitudinal barriers, I think, are the most heartbreaking, to be honest, because the physical ones, you just go, "Oh my gosh, there's no sidewalk here." You were talking earlier, Jennifer, about the lack of sidewalk in between two spaces that were accessible. But attitudinal barriers, when someone with a disability is considered lesser than, that can be very challenging. We have at Rick Hansen Foundation youth leadership committee, and one of the young women on there, she's amazing. She interviewed for a job, and the interviews were all virtual. She was successful in securing the role went to the office to start the job and was told, oh, sorry, we didn't know you had a disability. You won't be able to work here. Now, she has since got that reversed because that's illegal, but the awkwardness of her trying to work in that environment now, right? It's just so unfortunate. So those attitudinal barriers are the ones I really like us to be perceptive about. Okay, slide, move. Whoops. I just want to talk a bit about this activity. Might be something that you want to do with your students. It's called Circles of Trust, and you just make a chart and you put these headings across and then list those closest to you. So your family, your colleagues, club members, whatever you belong to. And then you start look at how diverse they are. And if they're very diverse, fabulous. But for those of us who maybe don't have as diverse a circle, maybe we don't interact on a regular basis with someone with a physical disability, then that's our cue to learn more. We have to make sure that we go to sessions like this, we do reading, we watch programs about disability. One of our ambassadors, actually, Bean Gill, she is on CBC now, a series called Push. Don't know if you've seen it. It's a little provocative, maybe not for students, but definitely for adults, but it's a real view of life. She calls them the wheelie peeps. So they're her circle of individuals who use wheelchairs. Some are quadriplegic, some paraplegic. One fellow has cerebral palsy. It's really interesting of how they just sort of dive into life, and it's a really great program, and it's free on CBC Gem. Just doing a little ad there.
Can I ask really quickly, what is SCI under disability?
Under disability, oh, spinal cord injury. See, we even start to use acronyms when we shouldn't, but yes. And so then, this just lets you have a little reflection, or maybe your students reflect on who they spend time with and why they might want to expand their horizons. And one of the most memorable feedback forms we got from a teacher who had one of our ambassadors come into the classroom and speak to her students was that all the interest in disability and inclusion prompted one of the students to invite this little boy with a disability to his birthday party. And the mom said that was the best thing that ever happened in that little boy's life up to that point, to be invited to a birthday party. So those are the things that can get students thinking about how they interact. And one area I just want to touch on, because we've developed some new resources in this area. Many educators tell us the most challenge they have, if they have a student with a physical disability, is how do we get them engaged in phys ed, recess, field trips. Most of the sad stories from the students that I interviewed were around field trips or sport activities or phys ed.
I read an article recently that as one of the ways to use AI, and that was actually the suggestion, is you just put into AI, do you have any suggestions to help me make the student with, disability blank be included with this activity? And they gave the example of a basketball game where a student was in a wheelchair, and so they had the construction class build a ramp so that the student could actually dunk a basketball.
Oh,
right?
that's
so
great.
AI actually came up with some of those ideas.
So this just shows how inaccessible this pool is. potentially to someone with a wheelchair, depending on how much, core strength they have. And this was one thing that was really fantastic when we traveled to Costa Rica. Paul took his shower chair. Every pool at this resort had a ramp into the pool. And I think, how simple would that be to do in all pools, right? Like when they're being built. I mean, the ones that are made of cement, right? And it was fantastic. And there was not anywhere that on that resort that he could not go in his wheelchair. So it's just a little bit of thought about those barriers to participation. And one of our students, I mentioned earlier, the wheelchair basketball player, said her best experience ever was when she was in grade 9 phys ed, and the teacher did all parasports. So they did sitting volleyball, they did wheelchair basketball. Not always are those programs available in every school, but goal ball is something that can be played with blindfolds. There's many sports that can be done in classrooms. So when you look at the Paralympics, which are coming up this summer with the Olympics as well, the ones in orange are winter sports and the ones in blue are summer sports. So you can see there's a lot more summer sports, but there are 28 Paralympic sports, and not everyone realizes that there's as many as there are. And there's actually Deaf Olympics as well for those with hearing loss. So that's very interesting. And just for a glimpse of all the things that can be done, these are, one is the picture of Rick Hansen doing sit skiing, which our son has done as well. But one of our ambassadors is in the kayak. Another is doing sledge hockey, sitting volleyball, wheelchair basketball. And then this is one of our ambassadors, Robert Hampson. He lives in Toronto, and he actually has gone skydiving. He did competitive swimming, and you see the pole there, that would be a tap on the head when he was coming to the edge of the pool, so he knew to turn. He's done downhill skiing with a guide, and of course tandem bike riding, and he actually drove a race car. That was one of his dreams. And so he had a guide with him in a race car. Brave guy, but he drove a race car. And then for someone who's deaf, again, this is one of our youth ambassadors. She does horseback riding, canoeing, camping. Lots of sports can be done with someone who has hearing loss. And so I think I'm speaking to people who already know this, but it is something that students may not know, is just being creative, inviting people, being welcoming, and always asking if someone wants help. Because not always do individuals with disabilities need help or want help. They will definitely tell you if they do, but don't make assumptions.
Yeah, actually, I read a great story a couple of years ago of a woman that is in a wheelchair and she has the whole system done. Like, she can go to the grocery store, she's fully independent, and it drives her crazy when very well-meaning people try to help her and she's like, no, I'm fine. They're like, no, no, no. And they get in the way because she has the routine and I'm holding, and it's like, just, I know you're trying to be helpful, but you're actually making my life so much harder.
Yes, it's so true. And when someone pushes a wheelchair, like, that is personal space, right? Like, that is, and that can be very disconcerting to someone. Although sometimes they ask for it, like my colleague, she'll say, I think you're going to have to push me up this hill. and so, we work together, but it's always good to ask. And I love this slide because allyship and inclusion is really about all the students who do not have a disability, all of us adults who do not have a disability. How can we be allies? How can we make sure everyone's included? That's really what it's all about for all of us. I did want to mention our Difference Maker program, because it sounds like you might have some students that have done some awesome things with their school audits and so on. We have a program. I will send the link out after this. And the submissions are due April 7th, but it's $500 award to an individual student, or if it's a class project, $1,000 awarded, and we do 3 to 5 a year, depending on the number of submissions we get. And last year we had some really fantastic programs. This is one, this teacher, Angelo Tocco, that you see in the center of that photo, he has profound hearing loss and teaches at a secondary school in Toronto. And so his students chose to do a video about a special app, which I now have on my phone, called Ava. And you speak into it and the text immediately comes onto Angelo's phone. So that's how you can communicate with him, because he does not lip read. Another assumption made is that all deaf people use sign language and can lip read, and he does neither. So because he didn't grow up deaf, so he never learned to read lips and did not learn sign language. And so now with the technology, it's wonderful because you can just speak regularly and look him in the eye, and his phone will show him what you're saying. That's I'll send the link. I think it's easier than you taking the QR code right now. And we're almost at the end, but I did want to mention, I know in the little write-up we talked about online learning, and we did run a pilot with the help of the Ministry of Education, 4 hours of online learning, which can be stopped and started, and unbelievable response. We're on pause right now because the response was so tremendous. Our goal was to have 500 educators complete the 4 hours of e-learning, and actually 761 completed it in between December 13th till the end of February, which was not a great time for educators. It's a busy time. You've got vacation in there. But our resource library, again, lots of great lessons and activities about the things I've been speaking about, and then ambassador presentations. So some of those individuals that you saw in previous slides, they can go in virtually or in person to classrooms. Of course, in person depends on geography and if we have someone close by, but the virtual presentations can be booked anytime. And these are just some examples of what's on our resource library. Inclusive Play is one of our latest resources, and we also have audio storybooks, just a variety of resources to help in the classroom. So now it's any more questions or comments? I will stop sharing my screen now.
Jackie and I both talked about the accessibility audit. So I think that would be a really good resource to include in the write-up, is just that fantastic tool to have students look at how accessible is your school, not just for mobility, but for sight and for hearing, and to truly go, like, literally my kids took a whole class and they just walked around the school and made note of all of the different things of how we could make the school more accessible, which is fantastic. I mean, one of the things they did is they put it's yellow duct tape, so it's not pretty, but they put yellow duct tape around all of the doorways and around the elevator and that sort of a thing, so that the doorways are more noticeable. And we got like new flooring that it just looks, pretty, and nobody had paid attention to the fact that it's white in the middle and then it's blue on the sides, so that again, people with vision impairments can easier see where the edge of the hallway is. But it's just by noticing those little things. So I think that audit is absolutely fantastic. The other thing I love to use in my classroom is the videos that you have for, I teach in a high school, so there's such great videos. And the one I really love is the commercial that you created with the accessible billboard, and how easily, especially now with today's technology, that we could make billboards accessible for everyone. And you don't even realize because I don't have a disability, that it's not accessible to everyone. But I think those are fantastic resources that you have.
And Charlene, I really appreciated the fact that you were bringing in, don't make assumptions. I think that, yes, we all have good intentions, but sometimes if it's something that we think is best, I think that education is so important that we should not assume or presume or whatever. And I really like the fact that when you say it doesn't potentially hurt to say, hey, if you need any help, let me know.
Right.
It's at least it's still giving them the autonomy to make that decision, and so it's important for us to share that message as well. So I appreciated the whole presentation. Thank you. That was great.
Well, I really appreciate you being here and this opportunity. It's great that you write a little blog about it, and I will send on the link to the Difference Maker award submission. It's not too onerous, but it is nice recognition if you've done something in your school. Like, I love the idea of the tape around the doors. You know, you just don't think about that. Any way to make it more visible, and even hallways to keep them clear for someone using a mobility device or for vision, right, is really can be challenging if there's a lot of clutter in the hallways.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, Jackie, that you're not feeling well. I'm so appreciate that you joined in.
Oh,
Well, I think as well with the recorded, I'm sure you know that sometimes life is crazy, but when there's times in a good space, then it could actually be far-reaching. Like
Yeah.
for me, I know exactly who I'm going to share this with. So that recording is very gracious on your part to allow us to record you, because it will then be, more accessible to others too. So.
yeah.
No problem at all.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. And then, like we said, we'll get things posted up as soon as we can. Jackie has said, yeah, that the grade 10 class is even presented to the school admin, and they still talk about it, and it's getting students involved. Like Rick Hansen said, it's the kids that are going to make the difference. So thank you again for creating these resources. I know most of them are even free to teachers, which is absolutely fantastic because we don't have budgets. And so thank you again for your time. I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay, that's great.